Stephanie stood on bright concrete as the sun shone directly onto it. The slab was new as it was barely walked upon. Stephanie squinted as her eyes adjusted to the lighting, but soon examined her surroundings. Her blue eyes jumped from one place to the next. They stopped at a set of metal-rimmed doors that were painted blue, and the rest of the door was made of tinted glass. She could see her reflection, and it was her current self. Stephanie then studied the walls of the building, seeing the familiar red and brown patterned brick. There was a large field to Stephanie's left side. Then her mind suddenly clicked, realizing that she was at her old middle school. The state of the school was like it was from the past, even down to the people she went to school with and their age. Stephanie's friends during middle school were over by the pond a few feet away from her current location. Near the fence lining and edge of the school's property was another group of people, mainly the popular kids which Carson hung out with a few years ago. Stephanie was shocked to have spotted Carson in the crowd, as he was taller and older than the kids surrounding him. He was confused and turning in circles, looking for something. "Why am I here?" Stephanie mumbled to herself. Her mind then clicked. I time traveled. She exhaled and looked ahead. Before her, Jackson was on the side of the building with some girl. It was his ex-girlfriend. Jackson glanced around in panic. His eyes locked onto Stephanie a few yards away from him, and he felt at ease for only a moment. Stephanie ran toward him as fast as she could. Wondering why she was coming over so quickly, his attention turned back forward to see his ex right before him. Memories of their relationship falling out flooded his mind. Fire ignited in his eyes as the blood pumping through his veins began to boil. He was confused and mad to be near her. Jackson took a deep breath. "Why the heck are you with me?" Jackson bellowed. His palms slapped against the wall, pushing himself backwards and away from her since they had been leaning against the wall together. He peered to his right to see Stephanie stepping in front of the two. She was breathing heavily and faced him with a look of concern. His eyes were filled with more fire and his hands formed into fists. Stephanie stepped back, surprised at how mad Jackson got during the few seconds she ran. "What do you mean? Why are you yelling at me?" the girl responded. Her voice was trembling as well as her hands. Stephanie faced the girl with soft and caring eyes in an attempt to calm her down. Clearly, the girlfriend knew how easily Jackson could snap, and yet she continued to date him, at least up until the beginning of high school. Maybe that's why she stopped dating him. The girl eased some, but tensed as Jackson continued to yell. "You should know." Jackson threw his finger towards her, ready to slam it into her chest. Stephanie grabbed his wrist. She shoved him backwards and took a step forward, making him give the girl space so she could leave. "Jackson, enough," Stephanie shouted at him with a stern and leveled voice. Her attention shifted to the girlfriend behind her. "Go." Her voice suddenly turned gentle as she watched the girl's eyes widen. It was as if she'd never seen anyone stand up to Jackson. The girlfriend nodded her head and walked away quickly, glancing back every once in a while to see if Jackson had calmed down, or if Stephanie was going to get hurt. Stephanie faced Jackson with anger. "What's going on?" Jackson glared at Stephanie, his anger towards his ex directed at her now that she's stepped in. Confusion also sought to dominate his emotions. "Why are we back at this stupid school? Why didn't she remember anything that happened between us?" He stepped back and checked the girl, who walked over to a school administrator. "Great, now she's going to get me in trouble." He turned back and stared at Stephanie. "What is going on?" "This is why I wanted you to leave. I didn't want you to get into this mess. Would you listen to me?" "No," Stephanie responded, her hands moving around her face and body as she explained. A heavy sigh released again, and Stephanie rubbed the bridge of her nose with her thumb and pointer finger, then pinched it. All right, look. I'm not working on a video game with Carson and Logan. This pocket watch is something special. It takes us to another world where anything can happen. We have these abilities, like superheroes? Jackson said quickly, cutting Stephanie off. Stephanie paused and took a second to think about the question. Yeah, sort of. I can explain the details later, but right now we need to get back to our world. It looks like we time traveled into the past for some reason, Stephanie said. She took another pause to think, then decided to explain some of the situation to Jackson. Carson, Tristan, Liam, and Caleb know about this because they're a part of it as well. I'm not the only one who knows. She leaned up against the brick wall and crossed her arms after she released her nose. Okay, why are we in the past and not in another world that's all magical? Jackson mused. He moved over to Stephanie's left side and fell back against the wall. He grumpily crossed his arms and pouted, trying to get his thoughts together. For one, this isn't the original watch. It's another one I made myself inspired by the original one, so the worlds are not the same. And second, I'm guessing the watch glitched when LD opened it. We were supposed to go to a redwood forest with some mountains in the distance. It's a small world that was hard for me to craft and program. But it's enough for what its purpose is. Stephanie rambled on while Jackson felt puzzled at what she was explaining. But I would guess the watch glitched us to this time because it wasn't designed for LD to open in the first place. Stephanie rolled her blue eyes, trying to figure out what was going on. Her forehead creased while she thought, but it smoothed back out when Jackson asked another question. Who's LD? Logan's dad, LD for short. It's not a clever name, but it's kinda catchy though. Stephanie gave Jackson a half smile, but dropped it immediately. He wants to take the watch and rule over everything in any world out there. Basically, he wants to be a god. That's what it comes across as, at least. The five of us have to stop him from doing that. It's our job. Stephanie set her hand on her pocket. Her eyes grew wide. Stephanie wrapped her fingers around the chain of the watch she pulled out. Relief flooded her heart as she thought to herself, "Thank God this is with me and not LD." Stephanie admired the watch. She then gently placed it back into her pocket and turned to look at Jackson. "Why is it your job to protect this thing? It was given to me out of everyone in this world with a note attached to it telling me to protect at all cost. I was trusted to take care of this, so I thought I could do it." Stephanie adjusted her weight. Both of their attentions quickly changed as a voice came from. "They're right. Logan helps us too." Just to add on from before, Carson announced as he walked up to them. But his dad doesn't know that, and he shouldn't know. Carson eyed Jackson intently. "You better not tell him, or else we are in trouble." "Okay, I won't," Jackson said and nodded his head. "But why? Can we explain this later?" "We don't have much time," Stephanie interrupted Jackson. He could hear that she was nervous, and Carson picked up on that as well. It was something that Stephanie really didn't show. She usually hid it pretty well. "I get that you have so many questions floating in your head, like how are we going to get back? How did you get the watch? Where did it come from? Why was I trusted?" Jackson's expression changed to a more wondrous and shocking look as she listed off all these questions. It suddenly hit Jackson that those were all the questions that were just popping into his head. "How did you know I was thinking about all those questions?" "I can read minds. Carson can read minds. We all can read minds," Stephanie said. Jackson stopped leaning against the wall and stood up straight. His eyes watched them both carefully. He didn't like the thought that Stephanie could read his mind, especially with the kind of thoughts that would pass Jackson's mind. He didn't want her to hear any of them. Because of the situation they were in, he decided to trust that she wouldn't read his mind for no reason. "All right, what now?" Jackson asked. "We have to find Logan and his dad." Stephanie crossed her arms in anger because of LD causing the mess they were in. "Come on," Stephanie said and walked towards the concrete slab she was standing on at the start. The building was now at their left side, while the open field lay to their right. Stephanie led the way to the back of the school building. There was an entrance, which Stephanie was heading for. Jackson looked at Carson intently, trying to read him in what he was thinking or feeling instead of following Stephanie. Carson stared back at him as well. But he was slightly irritated because Jackson wasn't moving like he was supposed to be. Stephanie was halfway across the building now. "Are you gonna go?" Carson asked in a snippy tone. He gave up quickly, not giving Jackson a chance to respond, and followed Stephanie. Now is not the time to just stand around like an idiot, Carson thought, feeling bad about the way he thought of Jackson. He knew it was clear that they were in a rush to get things back to normal. But Jackson might not understand that, so Carson easily brushed off his rude thoughts and pressed on. Jackson shook his head, mad that Carson just stormed off. He quickly caught up to him and kept his mouth shut, knowing that Carson would snap if he continued with his questions. It killed Jackson to not know what was going on. He reviewed his questions that swirled in his mind, trying to organize the things he wanted to know as soon as possible. He noticed that Carson was peering at him in a strange way. "Are you reading my mind?" Jackson challenged. Carson turned away. Jackson bit his inner lip, offended that Carson was reading his mind. He joined Stephanie at the back doors and glanced around. "So, what's the plan?" Carson asked. "Wait for the whistle," Stephanie said and smirked, knowing that it was going to blow any second. Back at their middle school, they didn't have a bell schedule. Staff members were outside monitoring students, and one member held the whistle to blow whenever recess was over. Stephanie's eyes were locked on a staff member nearby. The lady's arm lifted up and her mouth touched the metal whistle. Then she blew hard and loud so everyone scattered throughout the field could hear that lunch had ended. Classmates ran to the doors that Stephanie, Jackson, and Carson guarded. Everyone piled together into one big mob. The lady with the whistle struggled to weave through the crowd. Once she got to the door, her keycard swiped over the black sensor and the doors clicked. She backed away and surveyed everyone that aggressively walked inside. Stephanie closed her eyes as she passed through the doors. She wasn't comfortable with the immature people pushing her because of how impatient they were. Stephanie and Carson both stood at the left side of the hallway and hugged the white dingy wall the best they could, waiting for Jackson to come. Students rummaged through their burgundy lockers to the right side of the hall. Jackson strolled down the long hallway, passing Stephanie and Carson. He eyed all the posters that were created by his classmates on the school's policy. Each one of them colored differently and hung in a perfect line across the white bricked walls. Jackson then stopped at the next set of lockers and classrooms. His eyes gazed at the metal door with all the memories from the last 3 years flooding back into his mind. Carson and Stephanie reunited with Jackson. They had flashbacks of their middle school memories, but they were much different than his. "Come on," Stephanie said lightly as her hand tapped on Jackson's back. He twisted around and looked at her, noticing that she became calm once they entered the building. It was fascinating to see Stephanie when she was nice. It felt more natural. In high school, she had become more impatient due to the watch causing her stress. Jackson felt a warm, comforting feeling in his chest when Stephanie treated him nicely. The three power walked further down the hallway, where it became less crowded and silent. "What are we doing?" Jackson demanded. "What does it look like we're doing?" "We're leaving," Stephanie responded. "Please tell me you're not afraid to ditch class, because I've seen you do it before." Stephanie eyed Jackson as she pulled her phone out of her right pocket. "I'm pretty sure it won't affect the present or future. What I'm piecing together is that this is an alternate world," Carson explained to Jackson. "It's more of a parallel universe than it is the past. So whatever we do here won't affect our present time. I mean, nobody has looked at us strangely for being older. It's like we are invisible here or no one remembers us. There are some pieces missing from the past as well, like some trees that were outside are gone, or even the teachers we have are missing. Or there are people here that I've never seen before." Carson paused and eyed someone with neon green hair that had walked by. "Basically, what I'm trying to say is this world is created by the watch itself. Kinda like a computer filling in the spaces of a program. I'm not sure why it chose our past, but it did." He studied the hallway, seeing that some of the brown lockers were blue. "So why didn't you?" Jackson started to talk, but Stephanie interrupted him. "Let you beat up your ex? Because that isn't right, Jackson." Stephanie glanced up from her phone and then glared at Jackson. "You gotta stop doing that. I don't like it when you read my mind." Jackson's mood became bitter as it came naturally to him. He returned a glare at Stephanie, who didn't seem to take it personally. "It's not like I'm digging into your deepest thoughts and memories," Stephanie said and smiled. "I would never do that without a reason. Plus, you would know if I dug into your mind. That would give you a headache." She turned her attention back to her phone and concentrated on remembering a phone number. They got closer to the end of the hall, where a set of doors led to the front of the school. They exited the school. Wait, how is it even possible to have that power? Because it's not humanly possible in this world, right? Jackson paused briefly as they walked through the doors. "Don't you have to obey the laws of physics or whatever you call superpowers in this world? There are some powers we can have in the real world. For example, mind reading, agility, and strength that we get from the watch. It's only the reasonable ones, or ones you can't physically see," Stephanie explained. She then put her phone up to her ear and stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. A ringing tune came from the small speaker and filled her ear. Jackson listened in on Stephanie's conversation with the small voice coming from her phone. "Hello," the voice from the phone said. It was high-pitched and difficult to understand. "Hey, are you with your dad?" Stephanie asked. "Yeah, we're driving in a car right now. Don't know how we got here." Logan paused. "We almost got into a wreck." "Oh geez. Well, meet us at Jackson's house. Tell your dad we're gonna fix the problem he caused." "Okay." The voice returned and then went silent. Stephanie pulled the phone away from her ear and ended the call. She shoved her phone in her pocket and sighed in frustration. Stephanie glared at Jackson and allowed her angry eyes to soften. "We're going to your house," Stephanie announced. "Why?" Jackson whined angrily and threw his arms up. "If we go to one of our houses, then we're dead. LD would know where we live. Where you live isn't a secret to Logan and his dad. They are your neighbors." Stephanie marched up the small hill that led up to a busy street. Once at the top, she eyed the cars driving by. When the road was finally clear, Stephanie crossed. Carson and Jackson trailed behind. "What are you wanting to do at my house?" Jackson pressed. His muscles ached from holding in his irritation towards Stephanie. The way she volunteered his home for a meetup without asking made him tense. "We need to fix the watch's glitch to get us back home." Stephanie was focused on the hill they had to hike at a steady pace. Her legs shuffled at a quick pace, quicker than Jackson's, who was moseying behind out of exhaustion. He did his best to keep up, but what really surprised him was how fit Stephanie was compared to him. She wasn't out of breath like he was, yet she seemed to carry more weight than Jackson. Her figure looked overweight with how curvy her hips and thighs were, but when he got a closer look at Stephanie's arms, they were muscular. Who knows what her legs looked like under her black pants? They could be muscular too. Jackson then got a light smack in the arm. Carson noticed Jackson admiring Stephanie in a way most guys would to attractive girls, and he was bothered by it. Jackson ignored Carson and turned away. Neighborhood by neighborhood, it took a good half an hour to reach Jackson's run-down house near their current high school. It was built out of red-stained bricks and old wooden planks. The tan-painted house slowly peeled away in the rough weather in Colorado. The dying yard had a small tree struggling to strive in the powder-like dirt. Crumbling strands of grass gradually disappeared from one end of the yard to the driveway. Behind the sidewalk leading to the door, rocks were thrown in a section of dirt close to the house. A flower bed should have been placed where the rocks laid. In the driveway sat a bright red sports car. It was brand new and didn't even have a license plate. Stolen is what immediately came to Stephanie's mind. She wasn't surprised. Logan and his dad leaned against the car as they waited impatiently for the three to arrive. Stephanie could see some resemblance between both of them. Same structure in their body shape, chins, noses, and their hands too. But their eye and hair color didn't match up. LD had brown eyes and brown hair, while Logan had green eyes and blonde hair. It made Stephanie briefly wonder what Logan's mom looked like and where she was. It was one of the things Logan and LD never talked about. "It's about time you got here," LD spat bitterly. He stood up straight and adjusted his weight against the car. His eyes pierced Stephanie as she walked by. Logan copied his father's act and pretended to hate her as well. Stephanie knew this and held back her smile that wanted to creep out. Behind Stephanie, Jackson was startled at how hateful Logan could be. "So sorry that we had to walk all across town to get here," Stephanie said. She stepped up to the door of Jackson's house. "Is it open?" Stephanie called Jackson. "Yeah, it's open," Jackson bellowed and stormed up to the door. He yanked it open and entered, not bothering to hold it open like Carson would. Stephanie grabbed the door and waited for everyone to go inside. Everyone followed Jackson straight to his living room. To the right side of the room was a long gray couch, and across the coffee table in the center were two black chairs. Stephanie sat in the center of the couch. Carson sat on the left side of her, and Jackson on the right. Logan and his dad sat in the chairs. All the seats pointed to the coffee table in the center. Two lamps were set on the sides of the fireplace mantel, where a large TV hung between. Pictures were scattered around the small, poorly lit room. A desk with piles of papers stacked on it stood in the left corner of the room. "So, why are we here?" LD asked and glared directly at Stephanie and Carson. "When you opened this watch, you made it glitch and created this world we are in, which is a parallel universe of our past." Stephanie pulled out the pocket watch from her right pocket. "I don't care where we are. Just give me the dang watch, Stephanie." LD stood up and held his hand out. It was an oddly nice gesture to wait calmly for it to be handed to him. But all LD got was cold stares from Stephanie and Carson. Jackson, on the other hand, was confused as to why LD was acting like a child and demanding the watch from Stephanie, as if she would ever hand over the most powerful weapon just like that. Okay, Stephanie exhaled and lifted her left hand up to rub her temple. You're not getting it. This isn't the watch you want, you moron. This is a different one. Stephanie shook the other watch before LD's face and pulled it back before it could get snatched by him. LD kept eyeing Stephanie as she sat back down. He noticed that the watch she held was in fact different, having a bird carved into the center of the metal lid and a tree lightly shaded into the background. The watch in Stephanie's hand was a brightly polished bronze color. The original watch that LD wanted was simple, plain, scratched up, and a worn-down silver or bronze color. Overall, this watch was newer and had a custom touch to it that Stephanie liked. LD grunted in anger and dropped down on the chair. The way he sat down made it sound like the chair would break, which ticked Jackson off even more. LD was enraged that Stephanie didn't have the original watch on her. If she did, he might have succeeded instead of ending up trapped in this parallel universe. Then what is that pocket watch for? LD snapped. None of your business, Stephanie answered. Then where is the one I want? Back in our world and time period, Carson said. If you would just shut up, then we could get the glitch fixed and go back to the world where the pocket watch you want is at. Carson spoke in a serious tone with a hint of annoyance. Stephanie held the pocket watch in her left hand, and with the other hand she pulled the watch's knob up and twisted it backwards. After pressing the knob down, and a click echoed lightly. A blue hologram touchscreen projected before Stephanie's eyes. Her left hand gradually dropped to her side while the watch floated in place. This was a unique attribute the original watch didn't have. Stephanie read the screen intently, scanning through the files like it would appear on a computer. It showed the settings, systems, and profiles of Stephanie and the others. She then looked to the top right corner, where an energy bar level was present. It acted like a phone battery percentage, and the battery was under 10%. Stephanie's blue eyes glowed elegantly in the screen's lighting. This isn't good, Stephanie panicked. She began opening up files that were scattered around on the screen. Her eyes kept widening as she read over each file before her. Carson leaned in close, his shoulder pressed against hers, and read along beside her. What's wrong? Logan asked and leaned forward in his chair. The watch's battery is about to die, Carson responded in a puzzled tone. And all the files I've programmed by hand are corrupted. Almost every one of them are rewritten. Stephanie hissed and pounded her finger on the screen. What? Logan repeated. Carson's fingers touched the corner of the hologram and pulled it away from Stephanie. Carson turned to show Logan what the screen showed. Oh, Logan mused. He saw the low percentage, shown as a red battery, and the files written in gibberish. When it glitched, it took up almost all of the battery in order to create this world, Stephanie explained. We have to get this fixed before we are stuck here for good because I have no way to change this. Battery from here. Why can't you switch the battery out or charge the one you already have? LD retorted. It's a custom-made battery. It's not one of those small watch batteries you get from just any store, Stephanie said as her fingers glided across the smooth screen. This watch's battery was created in the original watch's world. So it requires higher technology to be fixed and or charged, and we don't have that higher technology in this world or even our own world. Oh, yeah, LD snorted. Your world is low in technology compared to mine. Stephanie rolled her eyes and ignored LD's comment. Then the room went still. Do you guys need anything? Jackson asked and stood up promptly. He was bored, mainly because he didn't understand the situation. So, he thought he could make himself useful and grab some water and snacks for everyone. He noticed small things that were different about his home due to the parallel universe they were in. "No, but thank you," Stephanie said plainly. "All right," Jackson sighed. He shuffled out of the living room. His attempt to be nice backfired. This is why being nice never works out. The sound of a faucet filled the silence as Stephanie worked on the pocket watch. Jackson came walking back in with glasses of water in each of his hands. He gave one to Logan and his dad, then walked out of the living room again. After another minute, Jackson sat down next to Stephanie and gave her a glass of water, as well as one for Carson. "Oh, thank you." Stephanie paused and sat in amazement as Jackson gently handed her the glass. As she took a drink, it hit her how parched she had been. The stress of the watch blinded her needs. Stephanie set the glass beside her and leaned back into the stiff couch. Carson sipped on his water. "How long is it going to take to fix the watch?" Logan imitated his dad's impatience. His foot began to tap as if he had an energy drink while driving over to Jackson's house. He set his glass of water on a small table in between his chair and his dad's. "I don't know. From what I'm seeing, it might be a while," Stephanie answered with a sigh. She dropped her finger back to the screen and hovered over the writing of one document. Jackson leaned forward, intrigued on what the hologram looked like and how it worked. "This technology isn't even possible," Jackson stated. "It was only like 5 years ago when the iPod Touch was invented, and all of a sudden you have this." Jackson mused as he slowly set his chin on his hand. He soon became mesmerized watching Stephanie and the screen. Stephanie opened up another blue screen and pushed it to Carson. "Carson, can you work on this? I can't tackle this all on my own." Stephanie moaned with stress aching throughout her entire body. Carson grabbed the screen and adjusted it to his height. He began to pull up files and briefly viewed them. He leaned back to relax, which Stephanie refused to do. "Is it fixed yet?" Logan asked after a minute of silence. Stephanie peered at Logan, then shot a shut-up glare. He bit his lip and continued to bounce in his chair like a child. Logan twisted round to lay down with his feet hung over the back of his chair, while his head and arms slouched over the edge of the seat. He sighed out of boredom. "Oh my gosh, Logan, would you just chill, please?" Stephanie hollered. She refused to tolerate Logan's childish actions at the moment, though. She now understood where he learned this behavior since LD acted similar to Logan. Stephanie took in a deep breath to calm her nerves, then thought carefully before speaking. "It's going to take time to fix this, Logan. Please find something to do and entertain yourself." Stephanie pleaded softly and eyed LD as he stood up and walked away. She heard the front door open then shut. Jackson glared at LD, who stood right outside of the door and wondered what the guy was up to. "See, you're more of the fighting kind of guy," Carson commented as he worked, "and not the patient type." Logan scowled at Carson. "I'm just acting, dude," Logan huffed. "I thought we had to make sure my dad doesn't know we're friends. But whatever, I'll go do something." He flopped in his chair as he struggled to sit up. Then Logan slithered backwards and onto the floor. He sprung up and began pacing around Jackson's house. "He needs to work on that." Carson leaned over and whispered to Stephanie. "Well, it's Logan." "Yeah, it is." Carson giggled lightly. "I hear you." Logan called from the kitchen. LD walked back into the house a minute later and looked around the living room. His eyes locked onto the pictures that were hung above the chairs. In one of the brown frames was a young boy and his mother, They were hugging one another with bright smiles on their faces. LD clenched his jaw at the happy picture. Jackson stood up and joined LD while he scanned through his family photos, which were oddly accurate in this parallel universe. "That's me and my mom," Jackson spoke softly. "I see that," LD muttered in a careless tone. Jackson scrutinized LD, noticing the small details on his face, like the scruff on his chin, or the mole that had grown on the left side of his jaw. LD turned to eye Jackson, clearly not wanting to be observed. Jackson stepped away. Logan paced back and forth between the kitchen and hallway that led to the bedrooms on the left side of the house. Jackson raised his eyebrow as Logan stepped into the hallway and then stopped pacing. Concerned that Logan would enter his room, Jackson turned the corner and found Logan leaning against the wall. "Why are you pacing?" Jackson demanded. "Because this is taking forever," Logan mumbled. "Sometimes I hate the situations my dad gets us into." "Why?" "Because he makes things complicated," Logan whispered and released a loud sigh. "He's an idiot at times." "I can hear you," LD announced over his shoulder. His voice echoed roughly throughout the entire house. Logan ignored his dad's comment, not caring if he was heard or not. And then the halls became still. "Can you tell me more about the watch and the world that is held inside of it?" Jackson asked. He noticed Logan's facial reaction had calmed down. "Sure. What do you want to know?" Jackson hummed and grabbed his chin. He didn't expect Logan to comply so quickly, so he drew a blank mind. "When I actually have the chance to get answers, I can't think of anything." He rolled his eyes at himself. "That's okay," Logan said and skidded down to the floor. "I can just tell you some of it." He smirked as Jackson sat across from him. "So, I lied to you about coming from out of state." "Really?" Jackson said, raising his tone with hinted sarcasm. "Yeah, I actually came from the watch, which is another dimension, I think." Logan turned his head to the right, trying to remember if it was the correct term to use. He was oblivious to Jackson's sarcastic remark, which entertained Jackson. "My father and I live in the world inside the watch. I was born and raised there, so it's my home. That's why I barely know anything about your world." "That makes sense. How did you get out then?" "A while ago, my dad took the watch from Stephanie for a short amount of time. During that time, he changed a program or setting, whatever you want to call it, to where we would come out of the watch when Stephanie would leave." He paused and let the thought sink into Jackson's head. "Where Stephanie goes, we go. We're stalkers." Logan clapped his hands together. "All right," Jackson mumbled. "So this world that you come from, is it inside the watch itself, or does the watch open the portal to this dimension?" "It's both." Logan seemed puzzled. "I'm not sure actually. The watch is the portal to my home, but at the same time it controls it. That's why my dad wants the watch. He has control over our homeworld." "Ah, I see," Jackson said, understanding LD's irrational actions. There was another pause as Jackson carefully fished out another question through all his swimming thoughts. "When you guys go into this world, is it the same process as coming here, if that makes sense?" Jackson trailed off as he realized his question sounded a little off. "Yeah, the mechanics of the portals are similar. You open the watch, the lid flicks open, a bright light glows from the center, that being the portal, and it consumes the person until they are transported to the other dimension. The only difference is that the original watch, while traveling between worlds, pauses time for a short moment. The one Stephanie has, well, I have no idea if time pauses between worlds or not." "Okay," Jackson sighed, overloaded with information. Thinking back to when LD was looking at his family photos, Jackson pondered about Logan's mom and why she has not been mentioned. So, if you live with your dad in the watch, then where's your mom? Logan sat frozen in silence. He bit his lip and turned away. Jackson felt his heart drop as he crossed some sort of line with Logan. I don't know, Logan finally answered. My dad told me that she abandoned me when I was an infant and that she never wanted me. Wow, Jackson said and wrapped his arms around his knees. I guess I know what that's like. You do. I barely knew my mom. She divorced my dad when I was young and left. She clearly didn't want me. My dad made sure that I knew it. Jackson sighed and shrugged his shoulders. But, oh well. Jackson sat in silence, hearing Logan breathe heavily as their conversation died. Well, those are some touchy feelings we got into, Logan blurted out. Let's not do that again. Agreed. Jackson jumped up and strolled back to the living room. He pretended as if that conversation never happened. Sure, Jackson wanted to know more about the watch. But he didn't know if their topics would veer off into something touchy again. Logan followed behind Jackson and sat back down in the same chair as before. He acted as if he had more control than he did before, but not by much. Jackson took a seat next to Stephanie. Glancing over her shoulder at the screen. Touchy stuff, Logan, Stephanie commented, her eyes on the screen. Hey, Logan shouted, embarrassed that she called him out like that. You're fine, Stephanie laughed. Nice of you to explain the watch to Jackson for us. Anytime, Logan said and snapped his fingers to a thumbs up. LD shot him a glare as he watched his own son flirt with the girl he wanted dead. Logan dropped his hands down and turned away from Stephanie. Time passed as Carson and Stephanie worked on the watch with no breaks. It soon became sunset, and then shifted to late night. The temperature outside cooled down, and it became silent all around. Logan was fast asleep in his chair, curled up in a ball. Old was asleep on the floor with his mouth open and snoring as loud as he could. Stephanie sighed and leaned back. She closed the watch's lid, and the two blue screens disappeared. Carson exhaled as well and mimicked Stephanie's body language. Finally, Stephanie sighed. It's done. She stared at the fireplace and the wall above, where a clock was hanging on to a small nail above the TV. The time was 3:12. Exhaustion hit Stephanie hard. She drank the last bit of her water from earlier in the day. I set it to take us back in about an hour. There should be enough battery life for a simple task. She closed her eyes, slowly dozing off into a deep sleep. That's good. Will we be here when we return back? Carson mumbled. He laid his head on the armrest of the couch, showing he was ready to fall asleep too. Yep, Stephanie lay down on the right side of the couch, her head rested like Carson's. She stretched out and set her feet in front of Carson's face, and his feet laid beside her back. Stephanie yawned and drifted into sleep within seconds. Jackson tiptoed into the living room and came to a stop. He noticed everyone was asleep. In his arms were blankets and a few pillows. He shuffled over to Carson and Stephanie, carefully placing pillows beside them and draping a large blanket over their bodies. Then, Jackson dropped a small pillow onto LD's face. LD snorted and jolted up, then watched Jackson drop a blanket on top of him. There you go, Jackson whispered. Oh wow, thanks, LD grumbled and adjusted with his pillow and blanket on the floor. Jackson turned to Logan, who was slowly sliding off the chair, and laughed quietly at the scene. He laid a small blanket onto Logan. Jackson laid on the ground beside the couch, his head near Stephanie's and his feet by Carson. Pulling a black blanket over himself, he closed his eyes and fell asleep on the ground. The night gradually faded to morning. It took time before the sun warmed the plains of Colorado and the living room of Jackson's cool house. Stephanie opened her heavy eyes to the sunlight that blared into the room from the front door. Stephanie sighed and shifted her weight to face the back of the couch, but her gaze locked onto the clock on the wall and she stopped moving, looking at the time. Stephanie jolted up and rubbed her eyes. She glanced around, seeing everyone was still sound asleep. Footsteps filled the silence abruptly, and a man stepped into the living room. He glared at everyone, especially Jackson, who looked very similar to the man. Then the man decided to kick Jackson in the side. A terrible and inconsiderate way to wake someone up. "Get up," the man yelled aggressively. Jackson sat up and stared back at the man with shock in his sleepy eyes. "Where have you been? You have been gone for a day. Everyone was concerned and the community has been looking for you." Stephanie realized that the man was Jackson's dad. It would explain why they looked so similar, as well as the worried parent tone he used towards Jackson. His dad turned and eyed Stephanie for a brief moment. "She's supposed to be missing too." He pointed at Stephanie. Jackson's dad was confused as to why there were so many people in the living room. "What is going on here?" His loud tone woke everyone but LD, who was sound asleep. "Dad," Jackson started to speak up, but Stephanie took over immediately. "Something came up and we needed to handle it," Stephanie explained so calmly. It was a simple explanation, but it was all Stephanie could think of. "So we caught a ride with Logan's dad to a town and just forgot to let people know." "Why didn't you call then?" Jackson's dad slowly bought her lie. "Our phones died and we couldn't charge them," Jackson blurted out. Stephanie sat back and watched as Jackson took over once he got the hang of Stephanie's lie. "Well, you could have gone to a payphone or even asked someone to make a phone call." "Sorry, we should have known better." Jackson exhaled and laid back down. He seemed relaxed, like he didn't feel off about lying like Stephanie did. Maybe it was because he lied all the time given it came so naturally to him. "We won't do it again. You better not do this again." Jackson's dad glared down at his son and then noticed LD. "And who is that?" "That's Logan's dad, the guy who drove us to where we needed to go," Jackson answered. "We all were too tired to go home last night, and I thought it would be fine to crash here for the night." Jackson didn't seem too confident as he spoke. It was because he didn't agree with everyone crashing at his place. But his father was too mad to really notice Jackson's irritated tone. Logan added on with a tired moan. "Yeah, he's my dumb dad." Logan rolled his head on the armrest as he slowly woke himself up. Jackson's father just sighed and turned his attention to Stephanie and Carson. "You need to call your parents and tell them that you're okay. That way you don't worry them anymore and the community can stop searching for you. All those calls from your parents and friends and Amber Alerts can stop." The two nodded their heads and Jackson's dad left the room without a final word. Jackson sighed loudly. He rubbed his rib cage where his dad kicked him awake, feeling the aching pain still pulsate throughout his chest. Stephanie and Carson laid back down. Their eyes stared at the white popcorn ceiling as they let the recent events settle in. "Time didn't stop when we were gone," Stephanie thought as her body tensed up with her worries. "Great, I'm so getting in trouble later tonight." Logan yawned dramatically and stretched his arms and legs as if someone were ripping his limbs from him. He stopped and smacked his lips together, then face planted back into the chair he laid on. "What time is it?" Logan mumbled into the chair. Jackson pulled out his new iPod and held it up in the air. The time flashed on his screen. "It's 7. School should be starting in a bit." So we have to get ready for that. Unless you all want to ditch school today, Jackson moaned and dropped his arm down. Wait. So, does that mean we're back? Yes. Did you not get that from your dad yelling at you for going missing? Stephanie asked groggily. Not once did they run into a parallel universe version of Jackson's dad, something that Jackson should have noticed himself. Stephanie did her best to not fall back asleep while keeping her eyes closed. Yeah, all is good now. But now we have school, Logan whined as he slid out of the chair and onto the ground. He jumped up in shock as Carson shouted loudly, "Dude, shut up." Carson bellowed and sat up, glaring at Logan. Carson was not a morning person. He moaned some more, ignoring Carson's request. Carson picked up his pillow and threw it at Logan. "If you don't want to go, then ditch like Jackson said." "Hey," Logan yelled, muffled by the pillow on his face. "And it's not good that we're back like this. We have to fix the problem of us going missing for a day," Carson added. "Yeah, time did not stop for us on this trip." Stephanie sighed and rubbed her eyes. She sat up and climbed over Carson's legs. Stephanie shuffled over to LD and towered over him as he slept soundly. His head laid close to the coffee table, and his arms were used as a pillow. "Hey, wake up," Stephanie said as she kicked him lightly. She paused for a brief moment, expecting him to move. But he didn't budge. "Wake up, you moron. Go sleep at your own house." Stephanie continued to kick LD. A groggy moan came out of him, and he shifted his pelvis. "I will shoot you if you continue to kick me," LD threatened Stephanie with a stale tone. He rolled onto his back. Stephanie gradually stopped kicking LD in the side. It gave her pleasure to jokingly kick him for once in their interactions. Once LD opened his dark eyes, Stephanie retracted her foot and backed away. "Where's the bathroom?" Stephanie asked. "By the kitchen," Jackson answered with his eyes locked on the screen before him, acting as if he didn't care for anything around him. Stephanie stepped outside of the living room and headed for the small bathroom to the left of the kitchen. When the old faded door closed softly, a loud sigh released from Stephanie's mouth. A mirror hung before Stephanie, and her blue eyes locked onto herself. A deep purple color hung below her eyes, a sign that her sleep was not restful. Stephanie twisted the faucet knobs and splashed cold water on her face. A dingy and worn-out hand towel sat on the counter, which had a light smell of mildew radiating from it. Stephanie hesitated to use the towel, but found nothing else to dry her face off. "What kind of crap are we going to deal with today?" Stephanie questioned as she dabbed her face dry. Exhaustion hit her like a train. Gone for a full day. Is that even possible to reverse with the original watch? Or will it not apply to the mistakes the practice watch made in this world? "I'll have to sort that out after I charge the thing." Stephanie turned around and lifted up the toilet seat. Carson sat up and glanced over to watch Jackson scrolling through his iPod. He was fascinated by Jackson's Facebook feed, especially when he swapped over to the suggested friends. Carson hummed lightly and slid off the couch to join his side. Jackson became still suddenly as his finger hovered over a familiar picture. "Facebook, huh?" Carson asked. Jackson slapped his screen down onto his stomach. He then turned his attention to Carson. Yeah," Jackson said, his face flushed some, but not enough to be noticed in the poor lighting. "I was just going through my feed and seeing who they think my friends should be." "Yeah, I mean, that is the purpose of the app." Carson chuckled with a bright snicker on his face. "I saw you hovering over Stephanie's profile. You gonna add her?" "I'm not sure we're on friend terms," Jackson responded honestly. "And why are you watching me?" In defense, Jackson turned the tables on Carson and pointed out his weirdness instead. Carson responded with a simple shrug of his shoulders and walked out of the living room. Ugh, Jackson moaned. He unlocked his iPod again to take another look at his Facebook feed, where he had his finger hovering over the Send Friend Request button. His eyes locked on Stephanie's profile picture. Do I send a friend request to her? Jackson contemplated for a long moment. His thumb hovered over his home screen button and lightly pressed it, exiting out of the app. Carson, who was exploring the kitchen, leaned up against the wall and pulled out his phone. He opened his mom's contact number and dialed it. In the back of his head, he knew his parents were worrying about him, and it would be right to call and let them know that he was okay. The ringing echoed inside his ear until his mom's voicemail began playing. Carson's heart dropped. I guess it's too early for a phone call, he mumbled inside his mind. As it finished up, Carson opened his mouth to speak, but was abruptly cut off when the phone picked up. Carson, his mom's voice rang in his ear. Hey, Mom, he huffed in relief. Where were you, sweetie? Both you and Stephanie went missing at the same time, as well as some other kids at your school. Are you okay? What happened? She spoke quickly, and Carson could hear how worried she was through her strained voice. I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay. Sorry, something happened and I had to get away to deal with it. I didn't know beforehand to let you know. But again, I'm okay. I'm at my friend's house and safe. Oh, okay. Carson's mom took a moment to think. We all thought you were taken. Were you taken? No, Carson sighed, thinking in the back of his head that he technically was taken. I wasn't taken. So you ran away, huh? No, he laughed. No, Mom, I didn't run away. I want you home tonight. I'm going to tuck you into bed tonight because I love you. Okay, you do that, Mom. Carson smiled and laughed. All right, Mom, I'm going to school, so I have to get ready to leave. I will let you know when I'm coming home, all right? Sounds good. Love you, sweetie. Love you too, Mom, Carson said. His mom then hung up. Carson placed his phone in his pocket and noticed Stephanie exiting the bathroom. He stepped up to her and paused with his hand set on the bathroom doorknob. Just called my mom to let her know I was okay. Surprisingly, she handled me disappearing decently. Well, that's good. Now, it's my turn to do the same, she sighed and dreaded making a phone call to her mom. It'll be fine, Steph, Carson assured her sweetly. My mom isn't as relaxed as yours. Most moms aren't as relaxed as mine. It's both a good and bad thing, Carson concluded as he stepped through the door and gently closed it behind him. Stephanie whipped her pink slider phone out and dialed her mom's number. It rang once and was immediately picked up. Stephanie, is that you? Are you okay? Her mom's voice roared in her right ear with both anger and worry. Where were you? Do I need to come pick you up? I had something come up and had to deal with it. Stephanie scratched the back of her head, trying to tell the truth as much as she could. If Stephanie could, she would cut to it and tell her mom all about the watch. But the reaction of her mom was unknown most of the time. Her mom could be fine with the news, or she would tell Stephanie to give up the watch instantly. That was something Stephanie could not do. I know, I shouldn't disappear like that without telling you or asking, but it came out of nowhere and there wasn't any time to warn you. My phone died and I just finally got it charged. I was so worried. Stephanie's mom started to choke up, feeling sad and relieved that her daughter was okay. I thought someone took you. I know. Where are you at right now? Do I need to come get you? No, I'm at my friend's house. It's close to school, so I'm fine. I will be going to school and I will be coming home tonight. Don't worry. Whose house are you at? The tone shifted into suspicion towards Stephanie. Jackson's. What? I thought you didn't like that kid. Why would you be at his place? There was a moment of silence. Stephanie, what happened? Did Jackson got involved with the problem that popped up. So, Carson, Jackson, and I dealt with it. Anyways, Stephanie felt her spine tighten as things became tense between her and her mom. I should get ready and go to school. I'm going to be late. We'll talk later, okay? Fine, but when I get home tonight, we're going to discuss your punishment. Got it. Her mom's voice stood firm. Stephanie slouched. Got it, she repeated. Yeah, I got it. Love you, her mom added suddenly in a sweet tone. Love you too, Stephanie returned and hung up. Jackson leaned against the kitchen wall that was shared with the living room. He had his amber eyes locked onto Stephanie the entire time she was chatting with her mom. Stephanie shifted her attention and noticed him smirking. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Stephanie asked. Got in trouble, I see? PHHH. Not as bad as you did. Your dad kicked and yelled at you, Stephanie replied and crossed her arms. Jackson's face became a rock. No expression or feelings were shown. What do you want for breakfast? Jackson changed the subject instantly. He moved to the cabinets and began rummaging through each one of them. We don't have time to eat something big, Stephanie objected. I'll just eat cereal, if you have it. Jackson grabbed 3 boxes of cereal from the cabinet above the sink. He then collected enough bowls and spoons for everyone and stacked them on the counter. Milk is in the fridge. Jackson pointed to the small, dingy fridge. Stephanie opened it and pulled out a carton of milk. Who buys cartons of milk these days? Stephanie questioned as she pressed the corners open and took a sniff of the milk. It's new, so it should be fine, Jackson commented. Stephanie set it down beside the line of materials and made herself a small bowl of cereal, then doused it in milk. She then leaned back against the counter and ate quickly. Guys, Stephanie shouted as she chewed. Eat and get ready. We have to go soon. All right, Logan shouted back and trotted into the kitchen. Oh wow, it's that crunchy stuff you put in liquid. Dude, it's called cereal. Jackson said in disbelief. Is he being serious? He turned and looked to Stephanie for an answer. She simply nodded her head as she continued to eat. Wow. Well, I like this stuff, Logan added. He grabbed a bowl and then proceeded to dump all 3 kinds of cereal, Cheerios, Fruit Loops, and Lucky Charms into one mixture until it overflowed and scattered onto the counter. Once Logan had his food, he shuffled over to the small dining table and dropped down onto the wobbly chair. His face looked grumpy as he shoved large spoonfuls of his cereal concoction into his mouth. His face smiled as the sweet taste melted onto his taste buds. Oh, that's gross, Jackson thought as he watched Logan carefully. Carson walked out of the bathroom. He noticed the food sitting out and made himself a bowl of Cheerios and stood beside Stephanie to eat. Jackson made his bowl last and joined Logan, wishing to stand with Stephanie instead. Everyone heard heavy footsteps round the corner. I'm leaving, LD announced while approaching the door. He stopped and looked over at Stephanie, eating with Carson by her side. His mouth opened, but only a grumble came out, showing that he was too tired to even try a threat. I need freaking coffee before I do this, LD muttered as he walked out the door. Huh, didn't think he liked coffee, Stephanie commented. A cold breeze moved in as the door slammed behind LD, but it seems like he really needs it. Stephanie shivered as the cold air brushed up against her warm skin, which made the light hairs on her arms stand up. I'm surprised he has some self-control to be decent like that, Carson said in a low tone, especially round you. He bumped his shoulder into Stephanie's arm. He's never decent like that, Logan snapped. I swear, he's sleepwalking. Wait, shouldn't you be with your dad? Jackson raised an eyebrow. Because we're supposed to be your enemies, right? I honestly can't tell if he cares about me being with you guys or not. Like I said, he's sleepwalking. Logan shoved a large spoonful of gray milk into his mouth and missed. The gray milk dripped down into his shirt. Logan whined and smacked the milk off of himself. Dang it. I swear you're half asleep, Jackson said and rolled his eyes. Logan shot him a playful glare. All right, I'm going to school, Stephanie announced. She walked over to the sink and dumped the milk out of her bowl. Whoa, what? Logan exclaimed and jumped up. He ran over to the sink and watched the milk drain slowly. Boo-boo, but that's the best part of the meal. He turned with a sad look on his face. It's the best part of the meal, he cried dramatically. Stephanie looked down at his milky shirt. Logan blushed in embarrassment and stomped back to his chair to finish his bowl, spilling even more milk onto himself. Guys, seriously, let's get to school, Carson said as he chewed his last bite while cleaning out his dish. Logan moaned and set his bowl in the sink and stood by the door. He didn't have to grab his shoes since he left them on while he slept. Jackson finished up and watched Stephanie and Carson walk to the door side by side. He felt off that these two acted like a couple when Carson had a girlfriend. I guess that's why everyone teases them for dating, Jackson thought. You left your backpack at the school, right? Jackson asked Stephanie, joining her left side just to be near her. Stephanie simply nodded her head. Jackson felt awkward with the silence and studied the weather outside. It's cold outside and you have a tank top on, Jackson noted. Thank you for stating the obvious, Stephanie replied coldly, not understanding his train of thought. One moment, Jackson said and made his way to his bedroom. Stephanie exchanged looks with Carson, who shrugged his shoulders as they both listened to the rummaging in the room beside the front door. It was a strange build for the house, a bedroom adjacent to the front door with barely any room between the two. Jackson came back out with the black jacket in his hands. He handed it to Stephanie. Wear this. Oh no, I'm okay. Stephanie held her hands up and shook her head. She felt uncomfortable towards the nice gesture for some reason. Wear it, he demanded and shoved it into her arms. Stephanie cautiously put it on. It was large on her. The sleeves hung past her hands, but the waist part was tight on her curvy hips. The smell of cologne mixed with the cedar wood came off the jacket, which made Stephanie scrunch her nose. Once she zipped it up, her eye twitched. What? Jackson asked. This smells. When was the last time you washed this? I don't know, Jackson said and opened the door. It doesn't smell though. Yeah, it does. Stephanie laughed and walked out first, followed by Carson and Logan. She looked back, noticing Jackson closing the door with a small smile on his face. What got him smiling? Stephanie thought to herself. The walk to their high school wasn't far, as it was only a few blocks away. They could easily make it there in under 10 minutes, depending on how fast their pace is. Stephanie was in the lead of the small group they formed. Carson stayed to Stephanie's left side, while Logan came to her right. Jackson, on the other hand, strolled beside Carson. They all kept to their thoughts, enjoying the silence. You think anyone missed us? Logan asked excitedly. He bumped into Stephanie a couple of times for fun. Well, I'm gonna guess nobody missed you, Stephanie teased while peering at him. And if you don't stop running into me, I will trip you. That's harsh, Logan said and stopped bumping into Stephanie. I think you need more food. That, or you're not a morning person. I bet nobody missed me, or even realized I was gone, Jackson thought aloud. He put his hands in his pockets as a lonely feeling latched onto his heart. Stephanie glanced over at Jackson. Her heart dropped. Jackson returned her with a crooked smile. I mean, you knew I was gone. All of you guys did. Because we were with you. Stephanie gave a light chuckle. So, of course we knew. Dork. Jackson seemed to enjoy the teasing between him and Stephanie. It sent a warning sensation in his chest. Though, we wouldn't be gone if it weren't for you. And that watch of yours, Jackson joked. He raised his eyebrow in a taunting way. Excuse me, my fault. Stephanie stopped and crossed her arms. Jackson stopped and looked back to her with half a smirk on his face. Yeah, it's your fault. He grinned and Stephanie's face became cold. No, it is not my fault that you went missing. You're the one who wanted to hang out with us, all because it bothered me. For some reason, you like to bother me for your own entertainment. Stephanie stepped up to Jackson, staring into his eyes. She was close to being his height, but he still towered over her by a few inches. Jackson could smell his jacket's aroma coming off of her. She was that close. And for some reason, he liked it that way. Who cares whose fault this is? Logan said to break the tension. Let's just say it was all of us that caused this. End of story. You're not helping. Stephanie had a hard time hiding her smile. It's basically your dad's fault too. Isn't that obvious? Stephanie raised her voice towards Logan, pointing at him with her left hand. Logan turned on his heel and shuffled away. He thought that Stephanie was being serious, when really she was joking. He still can't tell when I'm joking. You kinda sound serious, actually, Jackson commented. Well, I'm being serious about you getting yourself into this mess. We all told you to not come, and you didn't listen to us, Carson justified. Logan paused in mid-step and turned on one foot to face the three. You guys didn't really say no to him coming with us, Logan said. Because if you were being serious, you would have pushed him away, and he wouldn't be here. Stephanie whipped her head around and glared at Logan with fire in her eyes. Her hair fell in front of her eyes, and she slowly moved the two strands behind her ears. Whose side are you on, Logan? Stephanie shouted playfully. Logan shrugged his shoulders like a confused toddler. Then stop, you were there. You heard us telling him to leave, and he didn't. Stephanie yelled at the top of her lungs. It was getting clearer that this was starting to become more serious for her rather than it being fun and games. Carson stepped up and set his hand on Stephanie's shoulder. I think he gets it, he whispered calmly. So let's just change topics. Stephanie huffed a loud sigh and took a moment to calm her emotions. Then she turned her attention to Jackson. You can't tell anyone about this. Do you understand me? Stephanie lightly pleaded. Jackson could sense that she was stressed with the whole situation with the watch and LD. It seemed it has been going on for months now, so no wonder why she could snap so easily at something as small as this. Why not? Jackson asked. He started to strut away, fearless of Stephanie and Carson's wrath. I have no one to tell this to anyways, Jackson thought to himself. Stephanie was annoyed at how rude Jackson was being. She took in a deep and calming breath and followed along Jackson's side. Because, Stephanie exhaled, this watch, or any of them, doesn't need to be known by everyone in our world. If this power gets into the wrong hands, then we all lose. Stephanie explained and stared at Jackson, who then nodded his head in silence as if he already understood the predicament. If you do tell, I'll erase your memories of all of this and you won't be a part of the watch anymore. You can do that. Jackson turned to face Stephanie. He wondered why she didn't do that in the first place. After all, it was a big deal that he had forced his way into this situation. Stephanie had every right to erase his memories and move on like nothing had happened. Yep. All right, Jackson's voice trailed off. I won't tell. Oh, and thank you. By the way, he added with a snarky tone. For what? Adding me to your group, Jackson winked. Stephanie stopped in shock, realizing that she allowed this guy into this mess. Oh man, Stephanie complained. Carson joined Stephanie and Jackson lingered behind as they walked forward. Do you trust him? Carson reached out and touched Stephanie's mind, asking her this question. Not sure. I might have to let him, since I already agreed to him joining. And he kinda saw everything and knows enough, also. His personality is taking the news better than I did when I first received the watch. Stephanie replied to Carson honestly. Is there a reason why we're talking in our minds? I don't want him to overhear us. I want to talk about it now instead of later, in case you change your mind. There's still enough time to get him out before he goes into far. Carson suggested as he looked forward. To Jackson, it seemed that these two were walking in their own silence. Logan picked up on the silence and fell back to walk beside Jackson. Logan then decided to butt into their heads. What are you keeping secret from us? Logan whispered into Stephanie and Carson's minds and smiled. They glanced back at him, seeing the large beam shining on his face. None of your business. Now get out of our minds, please, Stephanie said to Logan. He winced as she applied light pressure in his head, causing Logan to turn away as he walked. This ability was something that did less damage to one's mind. So, Stephanie and the others used this technique often to keep their privacy between one another. What exactly is going on? Jackson asked, watching Logan carefully. Nothing. My head just started to hurt. That's all. Logan looked up. He vigorously shook his head like a wet dog to try and get the feeling off. At the end of the street, the high school was just around the corner. Carson and Stephanie stopped to watch cars pass by while waiting for Jackson and Logan to catch up. Since they lingered behind in their own conversation, the four of them proceeded to cross the street and entered the front of the building. Once through the set of glass doors, Stephanie came to a stop in the commons. Jackson accompanied her side and peered around. Carson and Logan wandered to the middle of the walkway and stood around in silence, listening in on all the small chatter from people passing them. Stephanie. A light-hearted voice hollered from the end of the hall. Stephanie snapped her head to the call of her name and watched as Tristan came trotting over to her. His arms extended outwards and almost slapping someone's face. Tristan then wrapped his arms around her tightly. Logan laughed hysterically as Tristan squeezed Stephanie and lifted her off the ground. You're safe, Tristan said and jumped up and down. His heart melted as he felt relieved to have Stephanie in his arms, safe and sound. On the other hand, Stephanie grunted each time Tristan jumped and wished to be released. Okay, put me down, Tristan, Stephanie chirped out. Tristan gently sat her down, but still held her in his arms. Stephanie gave a warm smile. She was genuinely happy to be back. Especially with a warm welcome like the one Tristan gave, no matter how embarrassing it was. She enjoyed it. My gosh, I thought you were dead, Tristan puffed and finally let Stephanie go. He looked at everyone except Jackson, and then met his eyes back with Stephanie's. The smile he had on his face was sweet. Liam and Caleb joined Tristan, as they chose to walk slowly over to the group rather than run like Tristan had. They were both happy to see them safe, but they didn't show it like Tristan had. We were all worried about you too, Tristan added. His brown eyes darted between Carson and Stephanie. You've got to tell us what happened. Hey, what about me? Logan whined and threw his hands up in the air. You can take care of yourself. Tristan scoffed and swatted his right hand in the air. Plus, your dad is our enemy, and we can't go missing you two without suspicion, Tristan teased. Logan rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. He pouted as he was genuinely upset that no one cared about him being gone, even if he was the son of their enemy. Stephanie patted him on the back lightly to show she cared. Logan's mood lifted, and he became happier. Caleb stepped forward in the small circle that was forming between the seven of them. I'm surprised that Tristan didn't kill you with his hug, Caleb joked. He got a small stare from Tristan, but ignored it. What he said was true. We all were worried. But we know you could take care of yourself. For some things, I can't do everything alone, Stephanie said. She was full of thoughts about the times each one of them was there for her, even in her toughest times. Without them, Stephanie couldn't make it. Even thoughts of Jackson being there for her in the future passed her mind. A curious and dreamful imagination of what he could become in this family she had formed. But at the moment, Stephanie was still wary about Jackson joining the group. So, what happened? You guys disappeared for an entire day. Liam chimed in. He held his chin high and waited for a response. He liked closure. LD happened. We took a trip somewhere else because of him. Stephanie sighed in a simple and vague response. Before more questions could be asked and answered, the mood shifted as Stephanie's eyes fixated on one of her friends outside of this group, approaching her with what seemed to be fire in her eyes. Stephanie, the friend announced and smacked her on the arm. Her long black hair flowed smoothly over her shoulders and made her light green eyes pop. The figure she had was slim, and her arms were fairly small, but she could throw a painful punch. What, Kare? Stephanie still felt odd calling her friend by the new nickname she gave to herself. Her real name, Bree, was so common throughout the school that she wanted to be unique. Kare claims she's tired of being like the other Brees around her. Where were you? You went missing and everyone was worried about you. You were on the news, Kare exclaimed. The people surrounding Stephanie each got a glare from Kare suddenly. It was like she didn't see them before approaching them. Kare locked her green eyes on Jackson specifically when she spoke. Why are you hanging out with these guys? They're my friends. Oh, please. Kare snorted at Stephanie's response. I've never seen you hang out with any of these guys before. They can't be your friends. Kare peered at Logan, who clearly had his flirting face on. His green eyes moved up and down Kare's slim body. She snorted in disgust as he grinned at her. Please stop questioning me, Stephanie pleaded in the back of her mind. She exhaled and then gazed at Carson with annoyed eyes. What am I supposed to say to her? Stephanie asked Carson in his mind. It is your secret. You do with it what you want, he answered and simply shrugged his shoulders. In his opinion, Carson wasn't sure how to help or deal with Stephanie's situation with Kare. He wanted to, but something felt off and it held him back. Stephanie rolled her eyes, wishing Carson gave a more decisive response. Anyways, Kare coughed. She stared at Logan, who continued to gawk at her. Stephanie quickly shot her elbow into Logan's side to knock his act off. Ouch, Logan hissed and rubbed his ribs. Kare held a laugh back and coughed again. Don't scare everyone like that, Kare continued. Your mom was so worried. I thought she was going to die. Yeah, we got it. Everyone is upset with us for disappearing. Calm down, Stephanie interrupted. She patted Kare on the arm. I am calm, Kare said and elbowed Stephanie's arm off of her. Logan grabbed Stephanie so suddenly that it scared her. Logan's warm hand sat on her left shoulder, and he stepped beside Stephanie as if he was protecting her. With a stern face looking directly at Kare, Logan lifted his chin high and spoke firmly. "No hitting Stephanie," Logan commanded at Kare. Stephanie's eyes rolled and ended up on Logan. She felt embarrassed whenever Logan acted this way, mainly because he was such a flirty guy with anyone. His acts to protect and pamper her seemed empty in Stephanie's eyes. Deep in her heart, Stephanie only wanted one person to stand up like Logan was, and that was Carson. He couldn't. He had a girlfriend. Stephanie extended her arm out and slapped her hand into his gut. Logan moaned dramatically, as if it hurt, and wrapped his hand around his waist. "Okay," Logan squeaked and turned away from Stephanie. Tristan giggled and draped his right arm around Stephanie's neck. He turned his head and looked at her. "Ooh, that was pretty great," Tristan noted, forgetting that he was also touching Stephanie like Logan had. 3, 2, 1, Stephanie counted down. Once she said 1, Tristan's arm retracted off from her shoulder instantaneously. He took a step away from her to respect Stephanie's space. Knowing that what happened to Logan would happen to him, Stephanie felt relieved and turned to Carson. "We need to talk about training at lunch and about the watch," she whispered and patted her pocket, where the practice watch was tucked in. "Meet out front, by the trees?" Stephanie scanned everyone nodding their heads, though Kare and Jackson looked at her blankly. "Just meet me at lunch, Jackson," Stephanie simplified for him, excluding Kare. With a simple goodbye wave, Stephanie wandered off with Kare at her tail. An awkward silence sat on all the guys as they observed Stephanie and Kare chatting casually. Jackson eyed Stephanie, noticing the way she walked, light on her feet and swiftly. Then, the two faded off in the distance when they turned around a corner. "What's up with all of you guys flirting with Stephanie?" Jackson blurted out a curious question. "Logan's the one to always flirt with her," Carson answered and watched Logan stand up straight. "Hey, I saw him flirting with Stephanie earlier this morning." He pointed directly to Jackson. "He was a child tattling on someone. It's not just me. Tristan does it too." Tristan and Jackson stared at Logan with stern faces, as if exposing the two barely fazed them. "Yeah, but your guy's flirting gets old. You're just her friends," Carson stated and set his clammy hands into his pocket. "I wonder if my flirting with Stephanie gets old," Carson thought. But his eyes quickly widened. "What the heck am I thinking? Alice, your girlfriend, is the one I should only care about. I shouldn't be flirting with Stephanie or even thinking about it." He paused and listened to the doubt creeping into his mind. Is that even true? Do I even have feelings for Alice anymore? Carson noticed Jackson eyeing him. He flashed a quick smile in return to Jackson and then turned to read at the clock above the front doors. "She's like a tough sister to me. I don't cross lines like Logan does," Tristan objected. He put a proud, handsome smirk on his face. "What?" Logan replied sullenly. "Oh please, that's such a lie." "No, it's not," Tristan said. "I don't see me dating Stephanie. I like to play around, but nothing more. Your actions are nothing like a brother and sister." Logan stuck his tongue out. Tristan and Carson laughed, along with Jackson. "Alrighty then," Jackson muttered, distancing himself from the guys as he felt some type of string attached to his heart pulling him towards the classrooms. "I'm going to class. See you at lunch, I guess." He lifted his hand up, then proceeded to walk into the traffic that formed as it became closer to school starting. "Bye," Carson and Caleb said at the same time, watching him strut away in the hall. Caleb turned and peered at Carson. So, what's the deal with him? A new member. Carson responded with confusion. He wasn't exactly sure what Caleb meant or was happening right now with Jackson, whether he was joining the group or not. Carson could tell that Caleb wasn't excited for Jackson to join the group. Great, Caleb sighed. I have him in my gym class. Really? Yeah, he's a real jerk, Caleb stated. He doesn't ever show up to class in the first place, and when he does come, he doesn't listen at all. When we work together as groups, the guy ignores any direction or conversation we have. Jackson also doesn't have any respect for the teacher. So, why is he a part of this? If he treats school, teachers, and his classmates like that, how do you think he'll treat us and Stephanie when she teaches him? Will he actually be involved with our group or just walk away when we need him? Carson was stunned at hearing how Jackson acts at school. Caleb was right. If Jackson acts this way on a daily basis, he could act the same with them. Well, for one, Jackson followed us when we accidentally fell into the practice watch, even though Stephanie and I told him many times to leave. Practice watch, Tristan piped up and questioned. Yeah, I'll explain further during lunch. Carson pushed the topic to the side. He focused back onto Caleb as he spoke. Anyways, the watch glitched and we got thrown back to the past. Jackson freaked out and questioned us nonstop, so we answered his questions. That must have been annoying, Caleb said. Yes, but he was involved though, Carson objected. Maybe, just maybe, Jackson may treat this group differently than he does with school. I doubt it, Tristan huffed and crossed his arms over his chest. Well, Stephanie has decided he'll be part of this group. The way he kept his cool during all of the chaos stuck out to her, I guess. She gave him a light warning that if he doesn't keep this a secret or act properly, she'll kick him out and erase his memories. So it was her decision, right? It is her decision in the end. Tristan seemed disappointed as he voiced his blunt thoughts. Let's hope this doesn't end badly. Maybe he'll change, Liam suggested, giving hope to both Carson and Tristan. I'll give him one chance, Caleb snorted. Same, Carson agreed. Stephanie and Kare paced around the second floor of the school in silence. After a few laps, they came to a stop at one of the four corners, where Stephanie began opening her locker. Once the code had been entered, she tugged on the door until it opened properly. Stephanie grabbed her gray bag out of the locker and rummaged through her textbooks on one shelf. Kare cleared her throat. You want to tell me what happened when you were gone? She asked and watched Stephanie throw her backpack over her right shoulder. Not really, Stephanie answered and slammed her locker shut. Looking to her right, she noticed LD strutting his way over towards them. Great, Stephanie whispered. LD halted to a stop once his eye caught Stephanie in his sight. He seemed to smile nicely, but Stephanie saw through it instantly. Morning, girls, LD greeted. He sipped his Starbucks coffee cup that was steaming hot with a bitter aroma. Morning, Mr. Kawasaki, Kare replied happily with a genuine smile. Something that Stephanie didn't see often when hanging out with Kare. Morning, Stephanie, LD specified. Stephanie refused to speak to LD, and instead nodded her head and walked off. Oh, apologies, Mr. Kawasaki. I'm not sure what's wrong with my friend. Kare shyly spoke as Stephanie's actions took her aback. It's okay, Kare. Maybe she isn't a morning person and needs some coffee to start her day, he suggested and lifted his coffee cup up to his lips. His smile was crooked behind the steam. Maybe, Kare chuckled, and then turned to catch Stephanie. Kare bolted across the hallway and came to a skidding stop next to Stephanie. That was pretty rude of you to ignore Mr. Kawasaki and walk away, Kare snapped, crossing her arms and giving Stephanie a disappointed look. Stephanie couldn't believe that she and her friends were the only ones who knew LD's true colors. Everyone else in this world sees him as some charming man. Kare was one of those people. I don't like him. Why not? Kare shouted and startled Stephanie. Kare was triggered that Stephanie didn't like one of her favorite teachers so far this year. He's freaking awesome. Everyone loves the guy. How could you not like him? He's funny, young, good L. Reasons you shouldn't know. Kare, Stephanie sighed loudly and stopped in place. Can't you respect my opinion? I'm not forcing it upon you. At least tell me your opinion and why it is that way so I can understand better. No, Stephanie spat out abruptly. No, Stephanie said softer this time and shut her eyes. Why not? Kare stopped at the top of the stairs and grabbed the blue rail. She made sure that Stephanie wouldn't pass her and hear her out. Can't think of any reasons? Do you secretly like him and don't want to admit it? Kare smirked. Stephanie's nose twitched. She didn't want to imagine liking LD. Come on, Stephanie. We're best friends. I don't secretly like him. You wouldn't get it. You wouldn't believe me if I told you the truth. Stephanie pushed her aside, pressing on her track down the stairs. Her steps were heavy, showing that Kare was really getting on her nerves. Kare felt distant and empty. Questions rambled through her mind. Doubt passed by, saying that they weren't as close of friends as she believed they were. Kare chased Stephanie again. I would believe you, Kare shouted. You just have to explain, okay? Even if I told you with the thoroughest details, you still wouldn't believe me. Stephanie kept her eyes forward. Come on, just tell me. Kare pressed and bumped into Stephanie, rocking back and forth on her heels. No, for the last time, no. Can I just be left alone? Stephanie pleaded, followed by a dramatic slouch. Stephanie turned away from her. Kare reached out and grabbed Stephanie's wrist and pulled her back. In pure habit and reaction, Stephanie lifted her arm up and twisted Kare's wrist back and glared at her in the eyes in defense. Don't grab me, Stephanie demanded. Kare's eyes widened. Never before had Stephanie hurt her like this. When that reaction flickered in the eyes of Stephanie's friend, she released her grip. Kare held her wrist and rubbed it gently. What's wrong? Kare asked with concern. You never acted this way before. What happened during that day you went missing to make you act like this so suddenly? I just want to be left alone, Kare. Stephanie sighed and her face saddened. I can't explain it to you. I just want you to respect my wish on that, please. Were you abused? Kare said quickly. Were you? She paused her question and looked around, seeing if there was anyone around before finishing. Stephanie sighed in disgust, thinking the question was taking a darker turn, and met Kare dead in the eyes. No, she said firmly, that didn't happen. I can't tell you what happened. So leave me alone, okay? Stephanie backed away, keeping her eyes on Kare. She saw the distressed look grow on Kare's face and in her heart. Then, Stephanie spun around on her heels and strolled away as fast as she could. Kare stood in the hall alone, watching her best friend leave her. Steph, Kare whispered under her breath. What happened to you? She felt a small stabbing pain in her heart. Kare released her wrist, letting it gently slide down her body and back to her side. She turned slowly on her heel and headed back upstairs, dwelling on everything Stephanie said and done. It wasn't the Stephanie she used to know. Stephanie had turned the corner and fell back against the wall where Kare couldn't see her. She lifted her arm up, looking at the hand, who heard her friend carefully. I snapped at my best friend. And even worse, I heard her. Stephanie criticized herself. I can't let this frustration take control. I can't let this stress take control over me. Kare may fear being around me. I can't tell Kare all of this. Not now, at least. I just don't know if she would believe me. She looked up and watched LD approach her. Stephanie took a deep and calming breath, then met LD in the middle of the hallway. Nice one. By the way, LD chuckled as he towered over Stephanie. His breath reeked of coffee and cigarettes, making Stephanie scrunch her nose. She hated being so close to him. That lovely argument with your friend back there. She is so going to be on your tail trying to figure out what happened when you went missing. You scared her by reacting like you would to me. Love the idea that I'm rubbing off on you. LD tilted his head to the right and grinned. He acted proud, knowing that his abuse was making her stand on edge towards everyone she knew and loved. Shut up, Stephanie snapped and glared at him. Nah, LD cackled and strutted off. You should tell her about this. Bring her into this so I can have more fun. She is one of my favorite students, LD hollered over his shoulder. Whatever, Stephanie spat. Oh, LD burst into excitement and returned to Stephanie. Are we going to have a new member on the team? A new opponent for me to break into little pieces and watch him crumble to his death? LD laughed and turned back around. Can't wait to see what you do with that Jackson kid. I like him. Stephanie shivered as his voice crept into her head with a slight barbed wire pain rubbing against her skull. She hastily observed her surroundings, curious to know if anyone was around to hear what LD had said. No one was in sight. No, Stephanie whispered to herself as she watched LD turn the corner and disappear from her view, a small smirk on his face as he glanced back at her one more time.